before it starts.
Let me to get some of my cough drops before it starts. Let me to get some of my cough drops. Okay, I think we are online.
Did you mute your computer?
Yes, I did.
Hi, guys. Thanks for joining. This is Essence of Medicine, and today we're talking about blood pressure. I'm Amanda Armagast.
And I'm Dr. Bossi for Essence, blood pressure. Now, sometimes you make my blood pressure go really, really up high, Amanda.
Yeah. Why?
Well, what does that expression mean when you say you make my blood pressure go up?
Well, a lot of times when people are stressed out, overwhelmed, their blood pressure goes up.
Upset. Yeah. And that's actually a physical fact, meaning if somebody's upset, if somebody's under stress, or if the catecholamine, like somebody is, excited, the blood pressure does go up because our body is preparing for something what we call fight or flight situation.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard that word, fight or flight situation?
Yeah, we've talked about it a lot.
Yeah. So it is in a situation that actually based off animal behavior. Is research based on animal behavior. Now, each animal has a distance. As a matter of fact, different people in different countries have what we call safe distance or personal distance. Like we know that in Scandinavia, that safe distance is like few feet, whereas in Italy, people are just touching each other. That space doesn't really exist at all. And animals have something similar, meaning that there is a distance. If you're outside of it, vast majority of the animal try to escape or flight, go away from you. But if you're in that space, they know they cannot go away from you. They will fight you. Like a mouse, if it's cornered, fights back.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean in reality for most of the animal is that, when you meet another animal, either you're going to mate with them or you're going to eat them. That's the two behavior animals have toward each other. And then when you get too close, if they cannot escape from you, then they have to fight you. That's their last chance. But both of them activate a series of physiologic behavior in our body. Like when you're scared, what happens? Have you watched people in a scary movie? What happens when people are scared?
They scream. A lot of
They turn white, right? Like
Sure.
yeah, that is because all their blood get internalized. They don't need their blood going to their skin. They need the blood going to their muscle because they're either going to fight or run away. They get more blood to the internal, your muscle, their muscle, the brain. As a matter of fact, many of the other areas of the body shuts down. And one of the additional thing that when the animal get in that situation, I'm not sure if you have seen that. If a leopard is start to chase a gazelle or a deer, one of the first thing they do, they defecate, the animals defecate and urinate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because the internal organ, not only they're shutting it down, but as well they want to shed weight so they can go away. But a big part of this process is that all the vessels constrict in their skin and many other organs, but then the vessel that they go to the muscle, they open up. Part of the same reaction. And the first thing, the way you notice that is that the pressure that pushes the blood in our vessel, it goes significantly higher. So, and that blood pressure is what literally pushes oxygen and the nourishment and glucose and so on to the muscle, so the muscle can be more active. Now, that part of that is actual pressure, meaning that if you put a pressure device in your arteries, you see that that pressure is literally higher. By the way, it is unbelievably uniform how our blood pressure really is. Our heart is not like a continuous pump. It pumps, it feels back itself, and it pumps, and it feels back itself. But when it's pumping, obviously the pressure is higher. And when it stop pumping, it has to refill itself. And when it's pumping, we call that systolic pressure. That pressure, we call it like 110. Have you heard these numbers? You know what the regular blood pressure is and so on?
Well, I don't I don't know like what a normal healthy blood pressure is, but I have heard these numbers because when you go to the doctor, they tell you.
What was last time you went there? What was your blood pressure?
I don't remember because I'm not concerned about my blood pressure. Actually, on a scale, usually I would be a little bit on the lower end of healthy for blood
Oh,
pressure.
well, these days we know actually lower blood pressure, if it's constant, if it's yours to keep, it's actually a good thing. But generally we measure it in how many centimeter of water that pressure equals to push up. Imagine on one side of a hose, we put that into your artery. On the other side, we connect it to a column of water, and we measure it not in inch, we measure it in centimeter. Usually, when our heart beats, it beats like 110 centimeter or almost 4 feet of water column pressure. That is how the usually what the systolic pressure is. But then when the heart stops beating, that pressure stops, right? But our arteries, they are like a rubber hose. When heart beats, they expand. And then while in that moment when the heart is not beating, that pressure that literally increase the size of the arteries like a rubber hose, they squeeze the blood still out, and that we call diastolic pressure. That is why blood pressure has two numbers. The first number is how much our heart is pushing it out, systolic pressure, and second number, diastolic pressure, is how much the pressure that amount of the blood that is in our arteries and had made our arteries expand. The pressure in that elastic pressure of the arteries, how much is that pushing against the blood and pushing it forward? That diastolically. Normal numbers are 120 in the systolic and about 60, 70, 80, 60 to 80 diastolic. That is a normal pressure. And then that is why obviously when we measure the blood pressure, we don't put like a hose or a needle in the artery to measure the pressure. Sometimes we do in the ICU. That is how we measure the blood pressure in the ICU. We put literally a tiny needle in the radial artery, and we get actual those pressure waves. The pressure goes up, comes down, and then goes up. With each heartbeat, it goes down, and then it never goes to zero because it will be always the diastolic is the bottom pressure. That blood is always moving forward, but it has this variation. When the heart beats the systolic 120, then it falls to 60, 70 diastolic, and then it goes up and down. Now, when the last time they measured your blood pressure, how did they measure it, Amanda?
They put like a bag, like a wrap around your arm, and then you uncross your legs, and then it expands, and they're using the little pump thing.
Yeah.
And I think also there's something on your finger to measure your pulse.
Yeah, that thing on your finger is an oximeter, but I'm still old enough to learn how to do it the old-fashioned way, measuring the blood pressure. So practically what you do is you put a cuff on the arm and you measure how much pressure the cuff is producing and you put a stethoscope on the here on the elbow, you listen to the you listen to the flow of the blood in your artery at the elbow. So cuff on the upper arm, stethoscope on the elbow, and every time, you actually go all the way up until you don't hear anything. And then when you are reducing the pressure, slowly the pressure inside of the artery can overcome the pressure of the cuff. And then you hear like pop, 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 because every time it happens, the artery is closed in the diastolic, because let's say you put the cuff pressure at 120, right? And your blood pressure is 119. So it still cannot overcome. But then when the cuff pressure falls to 115, it is able to overcome the pressure of the cuff when the heart is beating, and then you hear the pop, pop, pop. But then when you come slowly down, when the pressure of the cuff comes below the diastolic pressure, meaning that artery stays open no matter what, then you don't even, again, you stop hearing the pop, 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 because that pop, pop, pop that you hear with the stethoscope is the artery opening up with the systolic pressure and then closing back up because the cuff on the outside is closing that. Now, I know it's a lot of word here, but practically based on what you hear at the elbow, you can gather the information about what is the highest pressure that is produced in that artery and what the lowest pressure in that artery. Because where you are within that frame, that the artery is between this pressure and that pressure, if the cuff is in that range, the artery opens and closes. But if you're above it, it's just closed. And if you're below it, it's just open. So you don't hear the pop, pop, pop.
Okay.
Now, when do you think we really understood what the blood pressure is? And this knowledge is so surprisingly new to us, how all of that works. It's all natural to me or to us now. But just a few hundred years ago, we truly understood. And one of the biggest achievements of one of the old doctors was that he understood that the blood flows from up down, because he could put your fingers on and he could feel that the finger that is closer to the heart, he would feel the pulse before the finger that is further from the heart. And that was his big achievement and so on. Can you imagine that was a big achievement just a few hundred years ago?
It is a big achievement because we still use blood pressure all the time today.
Yeah. Now, what do you think, what's your understanding? What do we use the blood pressure these days for?
Well, I only really understand it for health purposes, that it's not a good thing to have high blood pressure. Having high blood pressure can lead to different issues, heart attack, stroke, things like that. And then also it's a way to understand your stress levels, I think, so then you can learn to manage them.
Yeah. Now, I think one of the most important thing about the blood pressure and high blood pressure is, you remember when I said that when the heart is beating, it expands the arteries like a rubber hose.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if those arteries are not expanding. If the arteries are getting bigger, then the pressure actually doesn't go very high. But if the arteries are rigid, like, you have arteriosclerosis and you have very rigid arteries, that pressure goes very high because the artery cannot expand. So one of the problems with the high blood pressure is that is a sign that your arteries are not really expanding properly. Additionally, what is another problem with that is that actually our heart gets its blood supply after it stopped beating. Then there's it's actually very refined ways. There's that to feed blood, perfuse blood to our own heart. obviously when the heart is beating, the internal pressure is so much that the blood cannot come back to that. But once it stops beating and it start feeling it internally, that is the time actually our own heart get blood supply to itself. Okay. And for that reason, actually, those arteries in our cadaver lab, sometimes I open it up and show it to people. I open up the heart. The artery that feeds blood to our heart is actually behind the valve that feed blood to aorta. What that means is that the heart beats and then like a one-way valve. The aorta and big vessel keep the blood, but then there is a valve that falls back and prevent blood going back to the heart. So the flow can be only in one direction. Now that a small little opening that feeds blood to the heart is right behind that leaflet. So open up, blood goes on, and at that time, it covers that opening for the artery of the heart. But then when it collapses back, then blood can go back to the heart. And that refined method of feeding the heart has a huge impact on us. Because if the blood pressure is low or high, that really impedes with the how much blood heart itself gets. And one of the problem with the high blood pressure is that when the blood pressure is very high, it can damage our arteries. It can literally, high blood pressure can damage the lining of our arteries. And if that blood pressure is very high, obviously the arteries of the heart as well get damaged. And now that we understand the heart gets its blood in the diastolic phase, now we know the high diastolic blood pressure is even more dangerous than systolic, meaning if the second number, the lower number, usually we call diastolic, if that number is high, that is actually more detrimental to our heart than if the first number, the systolic pressure, is high, because that is actually the pressure that is constantly there and possibly cause more damage to our vessels, to our heart, and to our organs, and so on and so forth. Now, does your grandmother take blood pressure medication by any chance?
Both of my grandmas take blood pressure medication, but it's actually really interesting because my mom's mom has been on blood pressure medication forever, like probably since she was in her 60s. But she's also on a lot of medications and she just generally lives a little bit less of a healthy lifestyle. Where my dad's mom, I don't know if she's on blood pressure medication. I asked her a few years ago and she said no. So maybe it's recent that she is, but she's in her 80s and she has a really healthy lifestyle. She's walked multiple miles a day every day for years, even in Minnesota, she does. And then she actually takes certain precautions to help lower her blood pressure. Like she eats special foods that lower her blood pressure. She makes sure she eats cinnamon every day and things like that. And I guess it's working for her because she's not on that medication.
And you just mentioned something extremely important, that what we eat and our lifestyle truly impact our cardiovascular health and our blood pressure.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that we recommend to people who have high blood pressure to eat less salt.
Yep. She doesn't put salt on the table. She actually, like everything she makes on her own, chicken broth, everything, bread, she's making it all on her own. And she's just very cautious about what she's putting in her body. And she always has ever since I was little. So I think that's played a huge factor. Plus, she's a calm person, like compared to my mom's mom. My mom's mom doesn't get worked up and upset and yelling, but my dad's mom, she's like a duck. Everything floats right off of her. Like she doesn't really, she cares about what's going on, but she's not going to even say her opinion because she's not going to get worked up. So I think that plays a lot into her blood pressure as well.
And then here you just described why meditation works to reduce your blood pressure.
Yeah.
And by reducing your blood pressure, we just talked about that. If your blood pressure is high, it literally physically damages your arteries.
Yep.
And if you damage your arteries enough, you will die. This is the fact. Now, you just described how being calm, doing meditation, and that can reduce your blood pressure and stress, and so give you a healthier life. You just connected the dots for me.
But it's a whole lifestyle. Like my grandpa, he is a little bit he's a lot less healthy than my grandma, just physically. He is deaf in one ear and he can barely walk and stuff. But my grandma is she's Hungarian. She's very strict. And she told my grandpa, no, you have to go walk to the mailbox every single day, 2 times a day, regardless of your pain level. Because if you don't walk to the mailbox, you're going to be in more pain. And so that's how she's lived her life. And she's very healthy. And I think the walking has a huge impact on that too.
And we know as well, you see, our blood pressure is to keep blood going to our organ, especially our arm, legs, and so on. It is made to keep us moving.
Mhm.
And obviously, this balance of being able to be active, as a matter of fact, one of the best way to keep your blood pressure controlled is to have these episodes of high intensity activity. Have you heard of that? Like,
Yeah, HIIT,
yeah.
high
And
intensity interval training.
yes, yes. We know by doing that, your heart is healthier, your blood pressure is better. As a matter of fact, we know that people who are very athletic, they have lower blood pressure because their arteries are so in tune with them that they don't need that high blood pressure to push the blood through all their body. So activity is important. Diet, especially not too salty diet, is important. Now, still, we know we talk about that there are lots of blood pressure medication. Probably 99% of the people who take blood pressure medication is to reduce it.
Yeah.
And 1% of the people who take blood pressure medication is to increase it. Because high blood pressure, we know now, can cause a lots of damage in your body. Now, but have you ever thought why salt is bad for your blood pressure and would increase your blood pressure? Why do you think is that?
Well, I know that when you eat a lot of salt, you get bloated and sometimes your legs can swell or your like feet swell in a lot of people. And I've always thought maybe it has something to do with salt being dehydrating.
Well, more or less is like salt. You know that when you put salt, it absorbs water, right?
Yeah, it's dehydrating.
Well, our body does the same thing. When you have more salt in your blood, it actually takes more water from our body, bring the water inside of our vessels, inside of our arteries and veins. So, and if you have more blood or volume in your side of your blood vessels, obviously your blood pressure is going to be higher. Now, there is this literally a very interesting thing that the volume and the pressure are related. You know, if you squeeze something, then the pressure goes up. Or if you increase the volume, the pressure goes up. Okay, so and this is something that we know that the salt has this effect. And by the way, salt for a long time was a very, very rare thing.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, we may have talked to that about that in some other podcast. That
We talked about it actually right before we went to India about celery, salt, stuff like that.
yes, yes, in the old Rome, they used to pay the soldiers with the chunk of salt.
Hmm.
Because soldier could go to the bakery and give some salt, get bread, could go to the some produce and buy, give some measure some salt, and if with the value of salt being very reliable, they could use it like a currency.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is why the word salary and saliere and salt, salination, are all coming from the same thing. But so for a long time, salt was something rare. Imagine if salt is the currency and then you just hit a jackload of lots of salt mine, then you are a billionaire. No, it doesn't work like that anymore because we have so many different ways to get salt. They didn't have the technology. But In a natural life, salt is something rare. So our body wants to have as much of it as we can have. That
But
is
isn't
why
it isn't it true that some salt is better for your blood pressure than other salt?
not for blood pressure, but I'm pretty sure that some salt is just a regular salt. Some other salt have some other minerals that our body needs. Like,
Is
salt
I
B is more healthy for you because it has other minerals that your body needs.
Because I always thought that the issue was the sodium and that you can have low sodium salt.
Well, anytime, okay. I didn't want to go millions of years back, but you just make me. Okay. How much do you know about the periodic table?
I know the periodic table. I'm
So
pretty good.
on one side are the no the metals. On the other side are non-metals.
Mhm.
Every time, like sodium, potassium, sodium, and so on, lithium, and so on. Every time you combine a metal with a non-metal, like if you combine sodium and chloride, you have a table salt. But anytime you combine any of these two groups together, you have a salt. A salt doesn't need to be table salt. Table salt is that sodium chloride, but you can have potassium chloride, or you can have sodium or calcium chloride, or you can have, but obviously our body needs a combination of many different salts.
Mhm.
But 98% of what our body needs is just the sodium and chloride, the table salt. That is why it's called table salt, because we put it on the table because that's the one we need. If the other salt would be what our body needs, we would put that on the table and we would call that table salt. So table salt is sodium chloride.
Sorry,
98.
and I know this isn't a salt podcast, and we could even do like our own salt podcast because I think you have a lot of salt knowledge. But what about the iodine in salt?
Mhm. And that is what I was referring to. That our body needs a lot of sodium. Chloride is just to balance it, but we need sodium literally for our cells. For any cell in the biology to work, even bacteria, they need salt. Okay?
Mhm.
And chloride is just to balance the electric flow in the cell. Now, but that's not the only thing we need. We need as well calcium. We need, I said, you remember we said we have a metal and a non-metal.
Mhm.
Metal is sodium. Non-metal is chloride, but as well iodine is a non-metal. Okay? We don't need a lot of it. We need a lot of chloride to offset the sodium. We need iodine. We don't need a lot of it, but we do need some of it. Now, guess what? Even many, many, many 100 years ago, people noticed people who lives in the mountains, their neck grows really big.
Goiter, right?
Goiter, yes, goiter. We never ever see that again. We never see that.
Mhm.
And then and that is when your thyroid hormones are producing in your thyroid, and that thyroid hormone needs some iodine. Not much, but some iodine. It needs some iodine. But if it doesn't get the iodine, it thinks it has to grow bigger to catch the last molecule of iodine. So it grows and grows bigger and bigger. But if you don't have enough iodine. And then
Mhm.
they notice people in the mountain in Europe, they get that, but people in the coast, they don't get that. And then a long time later, they noticed that people in the mountain, they use the salt from the mines in the salt, and people in the coast, they use the salt just from the water. They let it evaporate, and then they get salt from that. And then they notice if people in the mountain use the salt not from their own mountain mines, but from the people who produce it in the coast, then their goiter get better. Actually, they can cure it. This was a huge disease. You see those old pictures, even 100 years ago and so on. These people come with a big, huge neck. You just give them some iodine or salt that has iodine in it, and they get better. It's a hormone. It can regulate lots of things in our body.
Mm.
If you fall low on it, you literally can die. Okay.
Yeah.
Those things don't happen anymore because now we can control our diet and so on. And now these days they add iodine to your salt. But as well, what I'm getting at, yes, 98% of the salt you eat is sodium chloride, but there are some other minerals, some other salts or minerals in that salt that is important for your health. But the part that really impacts your blood pressure is the regular sodium chloride. That is the part that really impacts your actual blood pressure. And the idea is here that because for a long time, in the nature, that was a rarity, we like to eat salty stuff. That is why Dorito is a Dorito. They put fried stuff in it, they put salt in it, and so on. So nobody eats only one Dorito. Okay.
Mhm.
And that most part of it is the salt. So our taste, our palate wants a lot of salt, but our cardiovascular system get overrun by it. And especially if you're predisposed and so on, then put you over the edge. That is why good diet, less salty diet, is really crucial for our health.
Plus managing your stress, because I mean, your diet will play a huge part in this, but you also need to manage your stress, because if you're the healthiest person in the world, you can still die of a heart attack.
Yes, you can. You can. All of that.
Actually, it happened to my friend's uncle. He was like the healthiest person she knew, and he died of a heart attack while on a treadmill.
And you see, the biology has lots of variation. And there are as well on the other side, there are as well lots of people who smoke until they're 100 years old,
And never get lung cancer.
never get lung cancer. But a statistic is statistic. All biology is a statistic. Life is statistic, meaning that if you go on treadmill, generally you're less likely to die. And if you go and smoke, you're more likely to have lung cancer. So those biological facts are the same. But individually, it can be a huge variation in one versus another. Okay.
Yeah.
So what now we talked about the blood pressure and what it is and what the meaning of it is, how to control it. Obviously, we are not going to go on the depth of how medication manages to reduce the blood pressure, but rest assured, the vast majority of the medication that reduces your blood pressure, it works on your arteries and veins, it opens them up, so there's more volume. When there is more volume, then the pressure drops. And managing it is extremely important, because we know that there's a very direct correlation with high blood pressure and heart attack, stroke, when your arteries burst in your brain and you have bleeding inside of your brain and so on. So we know there's a very high correlation there. So what have we not covered? What question would you have if you want? What else would you want to know about the blood pressure, Amanda?
I was kind of curious that if you have a more stressful life from the beginning, if your body like adapts to that, or if you just always have high blood pressure. Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, a busy, stressful lifestyle obviously produce certain hormones in our body.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a good understanding what those hormones are. And those hormones, you remember when we talked about that when you are scared, you turn white?
Mm-hmm.
It's because it squeezes the arteries in our skin. And when they're squeezed, all of the blood goes internally. There is more volume of the blood, and then blood pressure goes up. A stress situation produces something similar, that it produces some hormones, some biological molecules that squeeze our arteries and veins. So blood pressure goes high up in our arteries and veins. And that obviously, stress is a science for itself. We know that our body needs certain level of stress. But one of the problem of humanity is that now we have made that stress not to a temporary situation where you see in the nature, the leopard is running after the gazelle, and the gazelle either get eaten or runs away. As a matter of fact, 8 out of 9 times the gazelle runs away. And then a high intensity, and then the gazelle is not stressed anymore. It goes somewhere, start grazing and so on. But imagine we human have made our lives like the leopard is always 24/7 running behind us.
Yeah, seriously.
And our biology is not made to deal with that.
But I'm wondering if, like, for example, you like, let's say you're a child and you're born into a family who's moving every year. And so you really don't get adapted to any friends. Like, that's already stressful in itself. And then your parents are fighting a lot and then they're getting divorced. So they're always, so it's like your stress is going from, it's never going below a level 8. Does your body adapt to that? And then you kind of, your body understands that this is my normal stress level? Or are you constantly in like a fight or flight and then your blood pressure is high and things like that? Or does it just adapt to that?
It is second one. We know that if you're in chronic stress, your life expectancy is shorter. Obviously, mentally you get adapted to that. Like, look at my life, you mentally get adapted to that. But we know overall you have higher rate of heart problem, higher rate of heart attack, strokes, and so on. You cope with it mentally, but your body still will suffer. So the second version that you asked the question, you presented to me 2 versions. The second one is the case.
Okay. And then, so let's say that same person who had like that really stressful life, now they're going through something that's a 10 out of 10. Like, let's say they're going through like a real attack. And then there's someone else also going through that real attack, but they haven't had a super stressful life. During the attack, is the person who hasn't had a super stressful life, like if you were measuring their stress levels, like they were hooked up to stuff, the person who has a less stressful overall life, are their stress levels going to be higher at that moment than someone else who's had a stressful life their whole time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I don't believe we can individually really measure that. I don't believe there's any study that can tell you, okay, the person who has a less stressful life, it can respond better or worse in the actual like attack situation. Because I don't believe we have done really measurements like that, but we know people who go through chronic stress, they have less reserves. This is a fact. Your heart can do less.
Okay.
Your lungs can do less. Your arteries, your organs can do less. Chronic stress is truly something that take our resources from our body away. So intuitively, I would think in the actual attack situation, the person who's always stressed will perform worse.
Okay, interesting. I would have thought the other way around.
No, it's all about how much reserves. You see, even the 2 army fights, it's about how much reserves one army versus another has, right? Now, if your body is healthier, has more reserves, and if your body is stressed, it just have less reserves.
Okay.
No,
I just have a little word to say. So this Thanksgiving, try and put a little bit less salt in your meals as you're cooking them. Don't put the salt on the table and keep the conversations casual.
Yes, that to reduce your blood pressure and keep everybody healthy.
Yeah, so then you can have a good Christmas, keep Thanksgiving low blood pressure.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good day.